Hey everyone, can you guys hear me? Sorry about that delay, but we are ready to get started. Let me know if everything is working in terms of audio and video so that we can get started now. I see, hey Jaime, hey Puria, Rodrigo, Felix, Shausa, Adam, right? I always forgot that nickname. Cool, I think we are good to go. Excellent. All right. So if for some reason things start to get a little bit slow and there's a bit of a lag, let me know. I don't think in this case might be the internet, but I do have a few things running right now that might make the system go a little bit slow. All right, so today is going to be a fun one. I'm going to show you a couple of things. We're going to focus mainly on some presentation tips for Marmoset, especially because some of you guys have already been posting things that are closer to kind of like a work in progress or a presentation type of render. So I check the community on a daily basis. I just saw it today as well. Some of the improvements that you have done, that you guys have done in the characters is really impressive. I think there are two of you guys. So Felix doing the Spider-Man, that looks awesome, and Jaime with the little funny creature. I think from everyone, I think you two are close to presenting something almost as final before moving into other parts of the course like Substance Painter and those sort of things. So I thought at this point it might be an appropriate time to show everyone else a bit of that. And so yeah, the idea is to show you some prototyping techniques aside from what is already in the course inside Marmoset. So let me just bring the little creature here that Jaime very kindly provided. So let me just clear some stuff here, because that is what I was doing when I lost track of time, and then I realized that it was time for the stream already. So I'm just removing the textures, and I'll tell you why in a second. So if I were to just export this guy as an FBX, and it will export the textures as well, even though they are hidden, because I'm just turning them off. I'm not getting rid of them. So like I said, this is a little creature that Jaime has gone through and retopologize, add polypaint, and created textures from the polypaint and all that. But I just want to show you a very quick example. So here is the 3D model, or like the sculpture. And hey Simon, hey Alex. Sorry, I just saw you popping in the chat. So this is the model that Jaime has, and I asked him to send me the post version as well as this one. So I'm going to show you two things. The first one is because I have it here. Let me see. Right. So this is what Jaime published in the community, asking if there was kind of like a way to generate a similar look of the matcap or the material in ZBrush in Marmoset, and there is a total awesome way to do that, and even better, I would argue, as well as the fiber image. So I want to address these two things after I show you the presentation, because they're really easy fixes, and it's something that you can take into consideration once you export your stuff from ZBrush. So I'm gonna tackle these two in Marmoset. I just want to show you that if you have your model here, currently this entire set of models, or sorry, entire set of subtools amounts to almost 5 million polygons. All right. Jaime had a few more things, but I just deleted them because they were like not part of the final. But yeah, so 6 million polygons or 5 million polygons. And if you were to export this as it is with all these points, Marmoset can totally handle that amount of polygon. In fact, you can bake maps in Marmoset using the high resolution mesh and the low resolution mesh. So that's something that we might do later on in a different live session, or maybe I will add it as an extra video in the baking maps section of the course, because it's not something that I use all the time. I generally prefer to bake in Substance Painter, but it's for hard surface modeling, and in certain cases the bakers in Marmoset are really, really powerful, and they're very easy, so it's something that we can just tackle in a single video. But anyway, so this is just to say that if you wanted to export 8 million polygons to Marmoset from ZBrush, you can totally do it, and Marmoset should be able to handle it just fine. So that goes, for example, for the Spider-Man that Felix is working on. If you haven't done the retopology, you can also do it. Just export it and do a work in progress or a prototype in Marmoset. And again, that's covered in the prototyping video. I think it's module 3, at the end of module 3 in the course. Alright, so to export these, you can just simply go to the C plugin, go to FBX and click export from here, and it will export whatever is visible. You can export all or only the selected areas. Again, all of this is covered in the course. And I'm not going to export it because I already did, and the only reason I want to mention this is that currently the view that I have of this character is with no texture and no polypaint. So if I enable polypaint, just by holding shift and clicking on the polypaint icon, here's the cool polypaint that Jaime did about this creature. I believe the final one that Jaime chose was the purple and green, but I'm going to be demonstrating with this polypaint just because it's faster when I export. But anyway, the reason I want to mention this is because if you see your character like this and you actually have textures that are hidden, they will export, so you'll end up with a bunch of texture files in the export. So if you want to get rid of the textures, let's say for example I'm going to select the body, and you go down the bottom of the tool palette to the texture map, right? You'll see that the texture map is selected, and I can just turn it on and off, right? So this is, I believe this is the final texture that Jaime chose. So texture on just means that ZBrush is displaying it. Turning it off means that it's not displaying it in ZBrush, but it's actually part of the mesh, so it's associated with that subtool. So when you export it, it's gonna export it anyway. So if you don't want to export all the texture maps, or if you want to, but you don't want to see the textures in ZBrush, you can just turn it off here and click on the texture, and you'll see all the texture maps that make up this guy, and you can just click texture off, right? If you click texture off, then that texture is, or that subtool is not associated with any texture anymore, and when you export it, you will be able to, basically it doesn't export a bunch of textures. So that's just a little thing that I wanted to mention. Now let's go ahead and move on to the fun part, and I'm going to bring in Marmoset. And if you guys have any questions about this, feel free to put them in the chat. This is like, the way that we work in the live sessions anyway. So just chuck a question in there, and I'll get to them. I'm gonna switch to the full monitor so my camera doesn't cover anything. And here I have exactly the same exported version of the character, but in Marmoset. Now what's cool about this mesh as an example is that first of all, it is pretty dense. So if I select or click on this one, you'll see it's almost, the entire thing is green because of the amount of polygons. So that way I can show you that Marmoset can handle millions of polygons really, really well without lagging or anything. So other than this character, in the scene I don't have anything. I have a sky, I have a camera, and obviously the render settings. So I'm going to select the sky, and I'm going to, let's choose a more interesting one. So just by clicking the presets, let's go ahead and select something cool. Let's try this garage, because I'm sure you guys have it. This is a default HDR. The only thing is that this one tints the colors a little bit. Let's choose indoor fluorescence, and I'm sure you have that one as well. And I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click once in the image to generate a light. I'm going a little bit faster here because all of this is covered in the course. We haven't got to the kind of like the extra tips just yet. Alright, so by holding shift and right click and rotate, you can rotate the light, and you'll see there is kind of like an overexposed areas. It's very, very bright. But that doesn't matter just because we have the albedo set to a full white. But we can just tweak the brightness of the of the light by selecting it, or the actual brightness of the entire sky, right? So we can just tone it down a little bit. So that's something that we can do just very easily. Now, how do we bring in the polypaint or the textures into the character? So if you want to bring the textures, you have to export them, and like I mentioned, if you export the textures from ZBrush, you will be able to see them in a folder, in the export folder, so you can just drag and drop them into the right channel. In this case, it would be the albedo. So you exporting the texture would be in the albedo. However, if you export just a mesh with polypaint, we can convert this polypaint into color data. Well, that's basically what polypaint is. So I'm gonna take the body material. I have already assigned a material. By the way, the first time that you import a mesh into Marmoset from ZBrush, generally speaking, it will come in with a different shader. So it will come already with some shaders, but you will notice that the workflow is different. So you won't have roughness, you will have gloss instead of roughness, and you won't have metalness, you will have specular. So it will be like this. So when you bring it from ZBrush, this is the shader that you will get, right? I'm just gonna put it back to what it is. So this is the workflow that we are more interested in. It's the more standard one, roughness or metal roughness. So make sure that the micro surface, the way that the surface is reflected, is set to roughness, and the metalness is set to none. So because in this case there is no metallic, right? So that's the first thing that I would advise you to do. Just make sure that all the shaders that you use for your character, even though it is just a presentation render or a work in progress, are using the shaders are using the roughness and metalness. All right. Now the way that we bring in the color, I'm going to select the body, and in the albedo, instead of selecting albedo, I'm just going to select vertex color. Now because we exported an FBX, immediately we can see the polypaint, which is pretty cool, right? So again, if you wanted to use the different color, if Jaime wants to use the purple and green, I think it is, so the yeah, kind of like pink and green, you can just do that by importing a texture here and setting the color to albedo. So I'm gonna do that with all of them just by selecting vertex color, and I have assigned, although these are 3 different objects, you'll see as I select the 3 different objects, I'm actually assigning one single material to the horns, right? So if I just take my horns and assign that to the body, well, it's not gonna do anything because it doesn't have the polypaint, the right polypaint. So let's just put it back to what it was. All right. All right. Let's do the eyes. The eyes doesn't. I think they don't have any vertex color. Let's see. Oh, there's a tiny bit of a tint of color in here. Let's do the nails. Vertex color. The teeth and the gums. Alright, so now we have exactly what we had in ZBrush if we turn on polypaint, right? The only difference is that in ZBrush, Jaime has already assigned some materials, so the specularity here in the teeth is different from the body. But we have essentially the same thing, and we can just go ahead and play with the materials a little bit. Now, before I move forward and show you some of the cool tips and tricks about Marmoset for this prototyping technique, I'm going to show you something else that is pretty cool that you don't have to do from ZBrush or anything. You can just simply do it from Marmoset, and that is adding a little bit of ground and working on the presentation itself, or on the image that you're gonna render out. So the first thing is that if you go to Scene, here you can go Add Object, and there is a little thing here called the Shadow Catcher. So if I click Shadow Catcher, Marmoset is going to put this little plane right below, or right at the 0.0.0 axis of the world. So it's a really cool plane that allows you to simply catch the shadow of this character. If you want to hide the outline of the plane and this annoying light, if you don't want to see it at this point, just hold Control and W, and that will hide the user interface. Right? If you want to bring it back on, Control W will do that. Right? Control W. All right. So now that we have this shadow catcher, we can very easily see the effect of the direction of the light and the effect that it has on the character and in the ground. So I'm gonna turn off this fast preview, because that's gonna, I mean, right now if it is green, this rocket speedy viewport means that it's gonna be very fast. If I turn it off, now this there's not much change because we haven't done much, but the computation is a little bit heavier, right? So if I select the light and I just increase the width a little bit, that just changes the softness of the shadow. Again, all of this is covered in the course, in that module. But at least I know that, you know, there's a better quality light, or the shadows have more quality. But once I have that set up, I can go back to the speedy viewport and you'll see the shadow changes. But it is just a way to pre-visualize the changes. Alright, so the first thing that I want to tackle in this case is show you how you can achieve a similar result to what you had here, or what I had here in the shading of the eyes, right? So it is very easy. All we have to do is tweak the material of the eyes. So I'm going to select the eyes by double clicking them, right? And I want to change the roughness, which is going to change the specularity. Let's go ahead and turn the light around so we can see more of it. So I'm going to take the roughness and push it all the way down. Oh, I didn't select the right one. Hang on. The eyes. There we go. Roughness all the way down. So now we have reflectivity, right? So we're reflecting the entire environment in this in the eyes. And then we can just take the color and maybe just push it down to a darker color. Not all the way to black, because I want to keep some of the hint of the hue that Jaime already had in the poly paint, right? So they're pretty dark, but if you look at the original design, it has kind of like a faded or a bit rough specular, or a bit faded, and then a secondary highlighting here. Now I would argue that for this character, this a nice contrast, but if you want to achieve a similar result, all you have to do is take the roughness and then start pushing it forward until you spread the specular, right? Now that's one thing you can do. The other thing is you can play around with metalness to add a little bit of metallic to make it darker. And as soon as you start moving the metalness slider towards a higher value, the color of the specular is going to be tinted as well, right? I'll keep it at 0 because I don't want any metallic. And instead, what I can do is add a secondary pass of reflection, right? So this is something that I like to achieve with 2 spheres. So in the bonus module on how to make a realistic eye, or a human eye, I show you that I have 2 spheres, one where I have the albedo or the color, and the other one that has the reflection. So in this case, we only have a single sphere, but we can achieve something similar. So with the roughness at 0.3, giving me this diffuse specular, I can go ahead and go to the reflection, and below the reflection there is this secondary reflection. So I'm going to click this drop down and I'm going to add a GGX. This is something that I also use for the hair, for example, if I want to create some kind of anisotropic secondary reflection. And as soon as I enable this one, you'll see there is a more concentrated specular here, and all you have to do is just play around with these values here to change how this reflection or the specularity of this secondary reflection. Let's just put this roughness all the way to 1. Secondary reflection intensity, let's push it all the way up, and the Fresnel effect all the way up. And then we can just play with the secondary, or the original actually. But there you go. That's just the one way that you can go about it. This one is maybe too strong, so you can reduce the glossiness of that secondary reflection, or just play around with the original roughness. Like I mentioned, you can also use the metalness. So if I increase the metalness, it's also gonna darken up everything, and you'll see the speculars get a little bit of a a tint in color. So I don't mind that one. I think it looks quite interesting for this guy. But there you go. So that's one thing. Now the other two things that I want to show you. Oh, hey James, good to have you here. I just saw you coming in. And the other thing for presentation is you'll notice that let's put the light on the side. If I get closer, there are some areas the shadow is pretty dark or pretty close to a desaturated color, whereas in fact if this was to be like flesh or a more realistic approach to human flesh or or anything that has translucency like flesh or skin, then we would have the subsurface scattering. Again, that's something that we can handle in Substance Painter, as in creating a map to regulate the concentration of the transmissiveness of the material. That's a mouthful. But in Marmoset, you can achieve a pretty good result just by playing with the sliders. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the body, right? So the body or any part that has this color of flesh. And here on the diffusion, I'm going to change the way that currently the color is being diffused, or the albedo, and I'm going to change Lambertian to subsurface scattering, right? As soon as I do that, you might notice a little change in the way that is, maybe it's not that obvious really, but it will be more obvious once we choose what values to put in this section, right? Now, before I move into this section, I need to mention that if you want to enable subsurface scattering, you need to keep an eye on the scale of your scene, because the subsurface scattering, that's an effect that happens in the kind of like the thin area. So it probably is going to be very visible around the ears, maybe around this area that is thin, and closer to the tip of the fingernails, and maybe around the lips as well, right? So that's an effect that is going to be more visible in those areas just because they're thinner. But we have to set the right size for the scene. So if we assume that this whole guy is the size of maybe is twice as big as a human head, then we can get a pretty good result. So let's go ahead and do that first. So if I select the render scene, there is a little tick here that says show scale for reference. So under the scene tab, if I click show scale for reference, it should show me something, which means it's either very, very tiny. Oh, hang on a second. No, it should show. Okay, I'm going to turn off the character. Maybe this scene is way off. Alright, let's do something else. Let's go to the actual scene here and click on show scale for reference. That's the one that is going to show me like a little character, or it should, in theory, show me something. Don't know why it's not showing it. I'm going to change the scene size from meters to millimeters. You saw the change. Hopefully you saw the change in terms of the subsurface scattering. I just find it weird that it's not showing me the actual reference. It should give me an image. Hang on a second. I'm gonna create a new scene. Show scale for reference. It's not showing it. Ah, of course, Control U. Thank you. Of course, that's what's happening. Sorry. Oh no. I just closed Marmoset. That's a bummer. All right, let me set it back up really quickly. Sorry about that. Yeah, you're right. That's my issue. I generally speaking, I don't turn interface off. So that was a problem. That's why I couldn't see the image of the character. All right. It makes sense. All right, let me just set this back up really quickly. Vertex color. Vertex color. Now the eyes, we made them darker and rougher. We also changed the sky. Let's just add a new light in there. Bring in the shadow catcher. Right, and I'm gonna select the light and just give it a bit more of an angle here so that we can see the effect of the subsurface scatter a little bit better. And also turn off the speedy viewport, add a bit of a more diffuse light, and I think we are good to go. Maybe the color of the eyes is a little bit darker. Alright, so now, alright, we're back to where we were. So with the interface on, let's go to the scene, and I'm gonna show scale for reference. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to also select the body, and I'm gonna change the Lambertian for subsurface scatter. And like I said, the size of the entire scene is gonna have an impact in the way that the subsurface scatter works, or which areas Marmoset is gonna determine whether or not they're thin or thicker. So it is very easy. You don't have to do it from ZBrush. You can do it from Marmoset. So you can select the scene here at the top and change the scene in meters, or the importer scene. I usually just change this, let's say for example the scene from meters to centimeters, and that's gonna change things quite a bit. But what I really do, let me just set it back to where it was. What I like to do is just change the scale in here. So some people would say that that's not the right way to do it, but because it's an FBX, I don't care. I'll just put it at 0.5, and you'll see the scale of the human is a little bit bigger. Still, this could be 0.3, right? So this guy is almost, depending on the size that you want to set, but I think this is a good reference for the subsurface scattering. So now we can go ahead and turn off the unit, or the scale for reference, and I'm gonna leave the UI just in case, and let's go ahead and tweak the subsurface scattering. So I'm gonna start with the scatter map, and this one is the one that is gonna kind of override the details. So if you have a normal map, again, that's also part of that module in the extra mile, but just to reiterate, I want to select the body material and increase the roughness a tiny bit. Right, so this is how it looks with no subsurface scattering or depth in the scatter. If I push it all the way up, you'll see how it just basically blurs all those details. So if you have a normal map, this slide is kind of like overriding those details. So you have to be careful, or there is a nice trick that you end up with something that is not as realistic. But if you wanna push this really far to get a lot of these subsurface scattered, and at the same time you wanna preserve the details of the normal map, what you can do is in Photoshop add an extra channel to the alpha channel and create a mid-gray texture, just a flat mid-gray. And when you put in the texture in here, in the normal, then Marmoset is gonna keep the details. But I'm not gonna get into that. But it's a nice trick if you wanna try it. So in this case, I'm just gonna push it a tiny bit more so that we blur these darker areas a little bit. And let's go ahead and rotate the light around so we see more of the effect of the next step. So with translucency, I like to, again, you'll see that when we get to the Substance Painter especially, but I like to push things to the limit. So push everything all the way up like that, and then start reducing it to tone it down. So this is the effect. We can increase the brightness just by changing the color to a brighter color. And the translucency, well, this is the one that's giving you that color in this area, but the translucency depth is the one that allows you to determine what areas are going to be thinner just by changing this. Maybe actually let's reduce the scatters, because that's gonna let you see more concentrated the effect. So I think something like that. In fact, let me just go ahead and turn off the sky, or just select a color so that it's not as distracting. And I'm going to select the light, and I'm going to increase the brightness quite a bit so that you can see the effect, right? So maybe from this angle you'll see what is happening. So it's very, very strong around these areas that I mentioned, and the fingers as well. So now that we have this more accurate view of what is happening, we can go ahead and play with this. So the depth is how much of that is actually happening, how much of that effect is actually happening, and the scatter is how much this effect is gonna spread within like the flesh of this character. So we can play around with that, and then just bring back the translucency just to make it less translucent. Obviously, there are three things that play a part into the effect, right? So the first one is the light itself. So changing the brightness of the light is gonna change that effect. So let's just look at it from the front and set this is kind of like the key light. And remember that little trick from the lighting module, that the key light should determine the brightness or the maximum brightness of your image. So let's just go ahead and determine the maximum brightness with this key light, right? The next thing is the set of sliders that we just tweaked, right? And the third thing would be the color of the translucency. So again, just to show you, if I increase the light so that I can show you the color effect, or the effect of the color. If I change the color or this brightness of this color to a completely different color, let's say a blue, well, let's keep it red just so it's easy. So from this very saturated red to a white color, it's just going to change the effect, and it's going to wash out this effect, right? And if I go closer to the darker colors, it's also going to minimize it. So you can keep a very bright light and then compensate with this color, but I would argue that's kind of like a counterintuitive and not as realistic effect. So just keep the subsurface scatter. Just think about the color of the blood. Maybe this guy has a green color, or a green type of blood. I don't know. Let's just keep it simple. So sort of like saturated, right? And then take the light and set the right brightness, because obviously this is overexposed. Right, so we have done that with the, again, with the subsurface scattering, just playing with the scattered amount. We can get a little bit closer and see if we can fine tune it a little bit more. Right, so no scattered, and you will be able to see these details very, very easily. And if I push them forward, they start to blur out, okay, and that creates a more realistic effect. Just try to be subtle with this, because I know it's kind of like a cool effect and you can get excited about it, but just try to be subtle in the way that you apply it. Cool. So that helps. Let's just go ahead and do it really quickly for the horns, because the horns will have as well some scatter. So let's position the light here at the back, and I'm going to double click that, and now we have the horns. So just to repeat everything, and let me see if there is any questions. So Jaime is asking, does ZBrush also have a size reference as well? No, the way that the scale works in ZBrush is a little bit weird and unique, like everything else in ZBrush. It's just by units. You can determine, so ZBrush works with units, like ZBrush units, that's it. But you can determine what size those units are. So you can say, my units in ZBrush are 1 meter, or my units in ZBrush are 2 centimeters, whatever it is, and that's done from the preference palette. Alright, so let's go ahead and add a bit of scattering here. So from Lambertian to subsurface scattering, it did it a little bit. I'm just going to increase the depth, but it shouldn't be as much as the soft flesh of this character. It should be a bit sharper so we don't lose those details. And actually I'm going to play with the roughness, so give it a bit more of a roughness in this area, and that creates a nice contrast between the flesh and the actual horns. It could be the opposite. It could be very dull, and the body as well, the opposite, a little bit more reflective. Maybe that makes more sense, right? So I'm going to select this again, and this time I'm going to push this forward so you can see the effect very clearly, right? But this time I want to give it a different color, because it doesn't make much sense that there is blood or something coming through inside the horns, or at least I don't think so. So I'm going to change the color to a bony type of saturated yellow, and that will make more sense for this type of material. And again, just try to make it very subtle. These effects are very exciting to enhance the look of the final render, but it's better to keep it very, very subtle. I'm going to do the same thing here for the scattered depth with a more saturated yellow or darker yellow, and there you go. So this is very subtle, but it also everything helps. In fact, you can do the same thing for the teeth, because let's say this part, these details here coming from the gums might be too harsh. So let's double click that, subsurface scattering, and just by enabling, you see it just diffuses things a bit, right? So depending on how much details you want to keep, I would argue because of the nature of this material, I'm assuming there will be more. And again, just tweaking the color would help, right? And the translucency as well. Let's just make it a bony yellow color. Alright, so very subtle, but everything sort of like comes together in the final render. I'm gonna do the same thing quickly for the gums, because they also have certain level of translucency. Alright, very quickly, and there you go. So now we have a kind of like a more realistic representation of this guy. We also can go ahead and change the sky, and I'm gonna wrap it up here, because I just wanted to show you this quick setup and this trick with the subsurface scattering with just poly paint and a high subdivision or a high resolution mesh, as well as the drop, the cast shadow. So I'm gonna change it to, I assume this guy would be in the forest maybe. So I'm gonna click the forest, and that changes the overall lighting as well. And I'm gonna click here to create a light and increase the brightness a little bit. Right. So there you go. Now remember that try to keep it simple and only add lights as you need to, right? So one light should be the going rate. So just try to get one light working, and if it doesn't work, if it doesn't show what you want to show, then you add the next one. But try to find the right position for that main light or the key light, and then if you need to, maybe let's say that I'm happy with this key light, I'm gonna go ahead and add another one. But try to keep it very, very subtle. So I'm gonna select the sky and add another one, maybe from the other side. Let's go ahead and select that. And this one is gonna help me visualize the subsurface scattering and create kind of like a rim light here. So I'm gonna change the color to give it a tiny bit of tint and increase the brightness. So you'll see it's bringing up these details as well as enhancing that subsurface material. Alright, so those are two lights, and you'll see if I turn the first one, this is just kind of like helping from behind, and the other one, sorry, the new one is kind of like splitting the silhouette a little bit. But very simple, only a setup of two lights. In fact, this one is actually a little bit too brighter. I mean, a bit brighter from my taste, but we can tweak it later. Two simple lights and a shadow catcher and a plain background. This is more than enough to create a nice presentation render and even a turntable for this cool quirky character. Another thing you can do is from the sky tab here, we can take the brightness of the sky down, right? Maybe a little bit like that, just to get a bit of the reflection in the eye, and then take the child light brightness, which will refer to these two lights that are underneath the sky tab, and then just make them brighter. So you get less of that kind of like global illumination type of thing and more of the light information. Now, just to wrap it up, there is an awesome addition to the latest Marmoset. I think a couple of versions ago, if you go to the render tab, and you can enable this global illumination, and it's going to really bump everything up. So if I enable it, might get a little bit slow, especially because the amount of polygons, but you'll see the effect almost immediately. So you have a lot of bouncing rays filling in those dark areas, and it looks really, really nice just by enabling that global illumination. So that's something that I like to enable just towards the end, especially if it is a very heavy scene. But I just wanted to mention it's there, and you can also play with the ambient occlusion. So I'm going to turn enable GI for the time being, because it does make it a bit heavier. But ambient occlusion is something that you'll see around this area here, around the arm, right? I'm going to click ambient occlusion, and then we can play with the strength and the size. And also enabling local reflections will help with this type of reflections and just enhance the overall render. So one thing you can do is set all these up, so local reflection, global illumination, and ambient occlusion, and then just tick the rocket, and that way you have all your settings ready. But when you're previewing and moving things around, it's better to do it with this speedy viewport. All right, so hopefully, I don't know if there is any questions so far about this. Let's say that you want to do a quick turntable. That's also very easy. All we need to do is click on this icon here, create a new turntable, and then you can decide whether you want to rotate the light, or rotate the character, or rotate the environment. I'm going to take the character, so creature, and I'm just going to put it underneath the turntable. That's it. Now this is a turntable. I'm going to hide the UI, and I'm going to click preview. So as a way to present this character, right? As a way to showcase the progress and the work that you've done, I think this is potentially the best way to do it, and I think it's going to be more impactful than an entire scene. Now the scene is a cool thing. It's a cool project to try to put this character in context, and I would say definitely go for it. But it's something that will come after, right? Because if you focus on all of this complexity on the, let's say in this case, the tree and the grass and all that, it might confuse people, not confuse them or distract them. That's the word. Distract them from the main thing, which is the character in this case. And you saw I didn't do too much in terms of, I mean, it's not too much work. Once you have this ready in ZBrush as a prototype, you can just create this and share this around, and it's going to have a greater impact than just a screenshot in ZBrush. I'm going to pause this here, and I'm going to show you the other question that was brought up. So I'm going to save this one as it is. Just in case I make a mistake and I need to go back to this point. And I'm going to create a new scene in Marmoset, and I'm just going to drop in the other file so I can explain what's happening with the fiber mesh. Oh Jesus, we're already 50 minutes in. Oh, times fly. All right, creature Marmoset. Here we go. So I'm just going to show you this, and then give you the sneak preview of the fiber mesh brushes that I'm going to be releasing today. So you guys are going to be the first ones to actually see them in action. Probably just give you a quick rundown of what they are. And like I mentioned, because of your as being part of the Extra Mile community and the Extra Mile course, the founders of the Extra Mile, you're going to have access to those brushes for free. They're not gonna be much. It's like $10. That's usually what I charge for these brushes, but you're gonna get them for free anyway. All right, so this is the scene that Jaime was working on. There are a couple of things that I want to mention that are very important. So if you look at the arms of this character, and let's bring in a light and change the environment so that you can see it a little bit better. The arms of this character are inverted, or the normals are inverted. So this could be problematic, especially when you get to UVs and texturing, because the normals are flipped. So that's something that happened at some point in ZBrush. So if you select the arm, you'll see it looks like everything is inside out. Now there's a way to easily fix this from Marmoset, but I would argue it's better to do it, have a clean, perfect sculpture from ZBrush before moving on, and you can also do it in ZBrush. So I'm going to show you both ways. So in Marmoset, you can just select the mesh, and by selecting the mesh, you will have access to this transform and this mesh tab here, right? So all you have to do is click call back faces, and that will just fix it, right? The problem is in terms of the textures, and it will give you more problems later on. So make sure that it's and obviously this goes for everyone, and make sure that your normals are correct. So if I go here to ZBrush and I select the arms, I don't know if I already changed them, but here at the top where you have, well, for you guys should be on the display properties at the bottom of the tool palette, you can turn double off, and you'll see in ZBrush it gives you this effect. So in the second module, I believe, I showed you how, or the third one, can't remember, maybe the second one, I showed you that this is a very useful tip for working on like the inside of the mouth and things like that. But just make sure that before you export it, turn everything, or turn double off for everything, and click flip if it is flipped, right? So that will fix it. Because for example, if I select this one, right, turn it off, it is flipped, right? So the normals are flipped, but remember this one already has texture. So if I turn the texture map on, I can see the texture and it's working fine. In fact, if I turn double, the texture is working fine. But for the purpose of what we need to take this guy out of ZBrush, I need to flip it, right? So I'm going to flip it, and you'll see this is what happens with the texture, right? Because now ZBrush doesn't have an idea of how to handle the texture that was already assigned to these UVs. So what you'll have to do in this case is, again, first of all, make sure that this is flipped before, or that the normals are pointing in the right direction before moving forward. But if you want to fix this, the easiest way would be to just get rid of the texture map, right? Flip it, and now you have access to your polypaint, and that way you can just create another polypaint from texture, and will be applied, or should be applied. Well, in this case, it's not applied properly because you already have UVs. So the texture is being applied to the UVs, kind of like flipped. So that's one of the things that I mentioned that it could be problematic. But since this is just a working, or not a work in progress, a test run, I believe that's what Jaime was saying, that before going into a more complex character, he wanted to go through the motions with this guy. I think it's fine. Now the other thing, I'm just gonna turn this off. The other thing are the fiber mesh, and it has to do exactly with the same issue as the arms. Not because the normals are flipped, but because they're single-sided polygons, right? So if I select, I think you call them grass, right? So we have grass, right? By selecting the grass, I'm gonna turn off the callback faces, and now you can see both sides. So I'm gonna turn this for all of them, and it's just as simple as that, right? So now you can see more of the, all of the fibers that are in the scene. Now there are two more things that I'm assuming that's what Jaime was referring to, as in they don't look the same as in ZBrush, and they have to do with the actual geometry. So as you can see, these planes are almost, there's only like three segments, and they look very choppy. And that is because the way that ZBrush displays fiber mesh is different than any other software. As soon as you export fiber mesh, right? as soon as you export fiber mesh from ZBrush, the other software will assume it's just geometry, right, or planes. But in ZBrush, you have the ability to change the preview settings. So in ZBrush, I'm going to show you that really quickly so that you know how to handle it, or anyone that wants to use fiber mesh, and that's kind of like a nice segue into the fiber mesh brushes that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to select the body and just mask an area here to create some hair, and I'm going to go to fiber mesh, click preview, right, and let's go ahead and by the way, this is a nice little trick that in case you didn't know about it, I'm going to reduce the max fibers and increase the length. Alright, so the little trick is that you can take the base color to 1 and the tip color to, say, 0.0003, and let's put this to white, right? And you can actually grow the fibers with the color of the polypaint underneath, or the texture underneath. So the B color or T color, they represent, like if you have the B color to 0, it means you're telling ZBrush don't use any of this color of the little swatches here. If you have this at 1, it tells ZBrush use 100% or 100% of this base color, right? The same thing goes for the tip, and then you have this color profile. So you'll see just a little bit of this pink color coming out, or coming through in this area. You can just tweak this curve to get more of it, or just reduce it and get the actual polypaint. So that's just a little extra added thing. But let's say that I'm happy with this, and I'll do a quick render before I accept. Let's see what that gives us. Right, so it looks nice and smooth, and if I render this out, it looks like this in ZBrush, but if I export it, it's going to be converted to geometry. So what I mean by that is that if you go here to the segments, and this is exactly what you have, that Jaime had here in the marmoset, is that the segments are set to 3, but at render time, ZBrush is going to convert this to a subdivision of 2. So let me just explain this a little bit more practically. I'm going to accept, and I'm going to go into solo mode just to see it a little bit better. By the way, I had the fibers with the double enable, and you see it created double the amount of fibers, so that's always good to avoid that. Alright, so right now in ZBrush they look like planes. Maybe this one here is a good example. This little plane, it's a good example. Let me just push it out. And you can clearly see the 3 segments, 1, 2, and 3, right? But if I render, and those segments are determined here at the segment section, but when I do the render, it's going to look very, very smooth. Well, not very smooth, but quite smooth, right? And that is because here in the preview settings, ZBrush is taking into account these, BPR settings. It's taking into account all of these settings to display this the fiber mesh inside ZBrush. But as soon as you export it, it's going to export based on the settings that you set in the fiber mesh, not in the previews. So if you want to see how everything is going to export, you can just take the subdivision to 0, and that way it's sort of like get rid of the extra settings. So I'm going to do another render here with 0 subdivision, and you will be able to see in render time the exact same set of fibers, right? So now they are all planes. So this is how it's going to look when you export it. If you want to maintain the settings of the fiber mesh, what you can do is play around with these settings before you create them. So if I go to this guy again, go to fiber mesh, click preview, right? You can reduce the subdivision, right? So that when you do the render test, you will see exactly what you get once you take it out of it. And then you can go ahead and change the segment. So instead of 3, you can have that to 10, and that's just going to make it really, really smooth, because now each fiber is divided 10 times, or there are 10 segments, and the profile has to do with the thickness or the roundness of the profile of each fiber. So that's just something else to keep in mind, and that's why it looks the way that it looks in Marmoset. So if you want this to be smoother, you will probably have to do them before exporting them. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of a hint on what to expect from Marmoset, which is a pretty powerful software. By the way, if you want to render again, all of this is covered in the course, but if you want to render let's say the turntable, like in this case, so now this is a turntable, right? If you want to render this out, just go to Capture, click on Video, and set your settings here, and then just export it. So click Video and then export. That's all. That's all there is to it. I'm gonna close Marmoset now. Alrighty. So let's see if you have any questions so far. Cool. Oh, hey Gordana. How you doing? I think this is the first time that you catch a live stream. I haven't seen you in the previous live streams before, so welcome. All right, cool. All right, so now I'm gonna show you the final kind of like image that I created for the fiber mesh brushes. So let me turn this off. Right. So here's the image. So this is an image that was created entirely in ZBrush, and the render is keyshot, but it's, I didn't spend time doing any UVs or anything like that. It's just pretty much fiber mesh from ZBrush, straight fiber mesh from ZBrush into keyshot, and the head or the face and the eyes and all that was done in ZBrush as well, just with a quick poly paint. So it doesn't have too much. Let's say that this image is almost as the how can I put it? This image is the same as maybe module 3, up to module 3 in the course, in a way, just with the fiber mesh. So I didn't take it any further than than UV mapping and exporting it and do it in Substance Painter. Is all done in ZBrush, just with poly paint. And obviously the main part was the use of the brushes to style fiber mesh, and that's why I did it like that. All right, so let me just show you the brushes. By the way, if I go to ZBrush, with the brushes, I'm also going to include a couple of really cool things. Let me just try to find it. ZBrush, grooming brushes. So I'm going to include the fair ZBrush reference projects. There are like 15 of those. So if I double click those projects, I'm just going to open up the project in ZBrush. So these projects are going to be included with the brushes, so you will be able to have a look at those and play around with the settings. So this is created with the brushes, or it's groomed with the custom brushes. But if you click BPR, you'll see the final effect or the final render, and this one will take into account, the projects, once I save them, they're going to have the render settings, the material settings, the filter settings. So you get a pretty decent result straight from ZBrush. You don't have to do anything else. So you can go to render and let's say open up the BPR shadow and see where are the settings for this particular render in the shadow tab, or you can go to filters and you can see that I'm using 3 filters to kind of like enhance this render a little bit, just kind of contrasting and brightening everything a little bit, adding a bit of highlight towards the edges, and then an overall pass to make everything brighter. So in this case, I use these 3. In different projects, I use something else. You will also be able to go to the fiber mesh, right? And if you select the original plane, I'm going to turn off fibers. You'll see that the poly paint that I did is really really basic, right? It's nothing too complex, because the fancy look is going to be given by the fibers. So you will be able to select the base, and remember that you can save projects in ZBrush once you create your fiber mesh settings, and ZBrush is going to remember them. So I'm going to click on fiber mesh and click preview, and here are the exact same settings that I use to create the fibers for this render. So you will be able to just replicate exactly the same thing. Let's go ahead and just click accept just to show you. And also, so let me just go ahead and collapse this. The other thing that comes with the project and also with the pack of brushes is there are 3 materials. So if I go to the material tab, you'll see this is a custom material that works a little bit better than the skin shade, right? This is a slight difference, but at render time it works a little bit better. Now the brushes are all set in a custom palette. I'm not sure if I showed you that already, which I have it here. So the grooming palette. So this is a custom UI. It doesn't come with the pack because in order to share a UI, you would have to include everything else. And like I said, some of the macros, they don't make sense. But part of the tutorial that is included, the video tutorial that is included with the pack, shows you how to customize this and create this exact same palette. Alright, so just to give you an idea of what the brushes do, because they're really exciting, I'm going to select this fur shaper. So this mini palette here is just dedicated for this type of hair, which is the fur. I'm going to increase my brush size, set my tolerance to 5, and just give it a bit of a general direction. And you see it's very subtle in a way. It doesn't destroy the fibers as much, and it allows me to give it a lot of direction and have a lot of control in the way that I want to groom or direct the hair. So I can create this kind of like twirl effect. So something like that, right? So that looks a little bit better now than the standard way of the fibers, the way that they look in ZBrush. And this is a good example of something that I see a lot happening online on renders with fiber mesh. You'll see this area here, it looks kind of like flat. Actually, I'm going to turn off polyframe so that you can see it better. So you'll see that this area is getting a little bit flat, and that has to do with the collision tolerance. But I have a specific brush that will help you lift this without destroying anything. So this is a really, really cool one. Again, once you have finished giving it some kind of direction, don't worry too much about these areas, because there is a brush for that called the Fur Lifter. So you see the little icon gives it away. It just gives an idea that it's kind of like having a ball that goes under the carpet, and I can just go like this and fix that in one single go, and it's not going to change the kind of like the volume of the fibers. So just a quick pass fixes that that intersection. And if I look at it from an angle like this, you'll see that the effect is literally like if you have a cat and the cat goes inside the carpet and it just like moves through the carpet. That's the effect of this brush. So it's just to lift. It's really powerful. It's just to lift that area, right? So again, I just wanted to show you how cool these brushes are and how you can use them. Again, you're going to have access to them pretty soon. I'm going to release them today. You can use something like the brush, the sharp lengthener, which is similar to the grooming lengthener that is already in ZBrush, but this one allows you to generate like more pointy pieces like that. You want to generate a hairstyle that looks a little bit more interesting, and then you have the sharp clumper that allows you to create these clumps of hair really quickly. And if things start to get a little bit too narrow in this case, you can also have a declumper that is going to volumize everything a little bit. So it just gives you a very easy way to manipulate your fibers. The shaper as well, these two are essential brushes. So this one will reset a little bit of this clumpiness, but it allows you to create a very nice flow, especially for long hair like this. And one of the most powerful brushes that I just want to show you before I wrap up today is the Breaker, and it is based on a masking brush. And the reason it's so powerful is because right now, if you check the polyframe, it is a single polyframe, right? And I'm sure you've seen this in tutorials online. People like to start with a very well planned head and polygroups, and then when they grow the fibers, they have a bunch of polygroups that they can sort of mask out and select, or whatever it is, to control the fibers. But because these brushes have this breaker here, I'm going to show you exactly what it does, because it's really cool. So you select the breaker, and because it's the first time I selected with the masking brush, I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click on, let's say I want to control these fibers here, but I don't have polygroups. I'm going to click on this one, click and drag. Oops, holding control, sorry, because it's a masking brush. Click and drag, and you see I'm just masking this one that I selected plus the adjacent fibers. So I can very quickly create a very customized set of a selection with mask, right? And Control W to assign a polygroup, and now I can just, select it, mask it, and then play around with the rest of the brushes. Sorry, of the fibers, like that, and then invert the masking, and maybe use something like the clump refiner just to give it a bit of a, a bit more of a clump in this area. But what's really cool is that, let's say if you want to keep working on this, you can just do the same thing, just maybe a few more points in here, Control W to assign a polygroup. And now you have this new set of little fibers that you can groom and continue refine the general shape. So that's it, guys. That's pretty much what I have for you today. So hopefully you found that useful. Again, like I said, these brushes are gonna be available soon, and you guys will be able to find them. I'm gonna share in the community once I have them up. I'm gonna share a code that is for a one single use for everyone. So you can just go and get it, and it will give you like 100% discount or whatever it is. Let's see if there is any final questions. Felix, how do you explore and learn new techniques in ZBrush? You have so many techniques to share. I feel amazed. That's fair enough. To be honest, it's something that I do constantly, and a lot of the time is because I run into issues. So not everything is perfect. Not everything goes according to plan. So because I make a lot of mistakes, I learn from those mistakes, and I can just implement them. And sometimes I get to a point that I don't know what to do next, and I'm sure you're familiar with the same feeling. But when I get to that point, I just go, all right, what are my options? What can I do to fix it? And if the options to fix it or the solution are not very evident, that's when I start trying new things until I figure it out. Sometimes I just don't figure it out, and I have to go into forums and speak with other friends that are working in the industry, and they give me an idea. But it's all about trying to solve the problem, not just leave the project behind or move in a different direction. Just try to stick to solve the problem. And that's what the community is all about, right? Like you can just put something, and someone else might have already figured it out, or if I just see it and I know the answer, I can also share it. But it's all about just pushing forward. Like it doesn't matter what the problem is or what the issue is. If you just push forward, you will learn somehow. Hopefully that answers that question. If there is any way to shorten the hair if you make it too long, yes, there is. However, in terms of the workflow, I would advise to start with a short hair. Like if you're doing a hairstyle for a character, I would start with relatively short hair, depending on what type of style you want, and then start growing or make it longer. You can totally make it smooth. You can make it shorter by smoothing it. So by holding Shift with the normal smooth brush, that's kind of like smoothing it, so that cuts the mesh. However, with the brushes, I have a custom smooth. So if I select that one, right, this is a custom smooth for hair. You can smooth everything without changing the actual length of the fibers. So this one is really good, but it's especially for that. So if you want to reduce the size, you can do it with a normal smooth. Smooth brush. The smooth brush allows you to cut everything. There's another way if you want a perfect straight line. If you want to literally use kind of like scissors to cut through the fibers using the clip curve. So you can select that, hold Control and Shift, and it's gonna clip on the shaded side of the curve. So you can click that. You see, it just clips them to this section, and then if you take the smooth curve or the smooth brush from the pack, you can just refine it. Right, so that's one way to go about it. But in terms of the workflow, I would advise to grow only the areas that you need to grow to that length that you need it to grow. And that's why they built the bulk lengthener and the sharp lengthener. There's going to be a video explaining every single brush, so you will know what they do. But just roughly, I'll show you the difference between these two. So if I push this with the bulk lengthener, it behaves almost like a move brush, just increasing the length of the entire, the entire area of the brush. But with the sharpener or the sharp lengthener, it's going to be more pointy. So if you have this area like this, right, and you want to try to make it even, using the sharp lengthener, you can just start pushing from the sides like that, and then reducing the brush size until you get something closer, right? And it's not going to be perfect, but little by little you can just make it even. And then you can use the clip brush if you want to really finalize that, and use the smooth brush to simplify it. Alright, so hopefully that gives you some ideas. I think I'm gonna leave it here, guys. I need to clean the house. It's just a mess. So I'm gonna do that, and I'll let you guys continue working. Hey Javi, we're in holidays. Holidays end. Come back to work. That's good. We're just wrapping it up here, but you can catch up with the recorded version soon. I'll put it tonight. With the clip brushes, does it actually cut the hair, or does it smooth the polygons together? It doesn't. Normal geo. So with the clip brushes, the clip brush won't actually cut the fibers. They're just gonna kind of like pinch them all together, or towards that end. Because and you can cut them if you want to. You can use the slice curve or the trim curve actually, right? And the trim curve will actually trim the fiber mesh, but as soon as you edit the topology, you edit the mesh itself, it's gonna stop behaving as a fiber mesh, and it's gonna become just a normal mesh. So the grooming brushes are not gonna behave the same. The rendering is not gonna take into account any BPR of the fibers. So what I just did there, using the trim curve, actually cut the fibers, but now they behave like like any normal mesh, really. So anyway, can we create a curly hair? Yes, you can. You can totally create a curly hair. Okay, I'm gonna just show you that technique really quickly before I finish. Curly hair or wavy hair. There is a couple of brushes here. So there's this waver that manually allows you to create that effect. So you can start pushing up, down, and create something along the lines of a curly hair. You can also use, let's say, the shaper to pull a section out like so, like that. Maybe just create a little piece of hair here. Right, so if you have this piece of hair, you can curl it using the bender, and that's what the bender is for. So you can take, for example, the tip with a large brush, and then do this type of thing. So that's one way that you can do use these brushes to curl the hair. Another way is using some of the other brushes, like this frizzy movement. This is really good. It's more like a refinement brush, but you can just do this type of stuff, and it creates a very wavy pattern straight away, just with a tiny bit of movement, right? So that's kind of like a wavy pattern very quickly. So there's many ways to do it. There's another one that creates kind of like a wavy pattern, but with turbulence, and just clicking and dragging But again, those are just refinements to refine the look and feel of the hairs. All of them are explained in that little video that you guys are gonna have access to later today if you wanna download the brushes. All right, so hopefully you found this session interesting and useful. Please keep up with the good work and keep putting all the stuff in the community. Just quickly, I think only Felix have published in the finished work. This looks great. I think you can totally move forward with this for the other parts of the course. But I think at this point, if you watch the presentation or the prototyping on Marmoset, you can definitely create a really good looking render in Marmoset with whatever you have at this point without moving any further. But it looks pretty cool. And the rest of you guys, I'm gonna, as soon as I have a chance, I'm gonna go through some of these ones. It's just too much activity. This one is new, haven't seen it, Jaime. So yeah, I'm gonna go through it and just give a bit of feedback if I can, or as soon as I can. All right, guys. So I'll see you later. I'll see you next week. Maybe not next week because I have. Oh, by the way, if you guys also follow the ZBrush Live streams, next week I'm gonna be doing a joint live stream with Steven and Ana Carolina. So the three of us are gonna be revisiting like old sculptures that we've done like years ago or ages ago, and we're gonna share them around and work on each other's sculptures. So it's gonna be fun, and for that reason we won't have a live stream next week. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the community. Have a good one and keep up with the good work. Cheers.